English translation 367th contact. Thursday, 9th September 2004, 22:37 hours.
Today I can come a little earlier, Eduard, because there is nothing important that I have to do at the moment. Greetings, my friend.
And you be welcome and also greeted friend Ptaah. Actually, I wanted to ask you something after our correction work, but Bernadette preceded me with a question, after which you did not answer when I called you again.
I heard you calling me, but I could not answer because I was busy elsewhere at that moment. After that, I did not get in touch with you anymore because I wanted to come here earlier than usual today anyway.
That is thus good. Also, Eva has already left because Selena had called. What I wanted to ask you. Actually, I wanted to talk about it for months, but I thought that the time was not right yet. The thing is,
Your statements are correct, and they also correspond to my findings. You will do well to talk to him. A clarifying and advising conversation is a necessity. I am sure it will bear good fruit.
then I will take the initiative when the opportunity arises. Good. Then I have a question regarding polygamy and monogamy, which I am sure you can answer as a scientist in this field. Darwin did indeed make the claim that in the animal kingdom, male life forms are polygamous and female life forms are monogamous. Your father, Sfath, already taught me in 1949 that this assertion was as misleading as that the human was descended from apes, and Darwin, in order to substantiate this assertion, fraudulently filed down ape bones. As Sfath said, in all fauna, all female forms are as polygamous as the male forms. As a result, the males of the faunal life forms have different amounts of sperm depending on their species and way of life. The reason for this is that the more polygamous the females are, the more sperm the males produce, which is due to the fact that the sperm predominates in mating and displaces and kills subsequent sperm, which are introduced into the female sex organ by other males during copulation, when the female allows other males to copulate with her in larger numbers and for a short time. And as Sfath explained, there are even life forms whose females select the male sperm and only suck in the strongest sperm, so to speak, while fewer are eliminated. With regard to human beings, he explained that spermatozoa are not uniform but can be divided into 3 different forms, and that there is therefore a system designed to ensure that an egg can only be fertilized by 1 sperm, thus preventing several sperm from entering an egg. On the one hand, an egg immediately seals itself off from the outside as soon as it is fertilized by a sperm, but, on the other hand, other sperm form a defense block so that no foreign sperm from a man other than the first copulate can penetrate to the egg to be fertilized or impregnated if the woman admits several men to her while she is sleeping. One type of sperm is thus intended for the actual fertilization of the egg, while a second, a part of the large mass, acts as a defense block against further and foreign sperm, whereby this sperm defense block against foreign sperm of further copulants is supported by a third type of sperm, which not only repels all foreigners, but also kills them. Is my memory correct in this respect?
It all has its correctness.
Then I have a question regarding the typhoons and earthquakes in Japan. You said something when you left last time that things were going to get pretty bad there. And what is it about what Quetzal once told me? That heavy storms, which stir up the sea and set big waves in motion, can also cause earthquakes.
Yes, I remember, but I did not talk about it any further. My remark was about the fact that in the course of the next few months, Japan and other areas in the Far East will be hit by a series of earthquakes and about a dozen typhoons, the 10th of which will be particularly violent, causing enormous destruction and much suffering in Japan. Shortly thereafter, a major quake with a magnitude of 6.8 points on the Richter scale will occur in the Niigata region of Japan, accompanied by a large series of aftershocks. At the same time, the next big storm is already forming. The aftershocks will not be completely over, so there will be another major quake with a magnitude of 5.8 on the Richter scale. These are not aftershocks, but another actual earthquake in the same area. The cause of the quake has nothing to do with the first and its aftershock. As soon as the quake is over, the next one will follow in the Nagaoka area with a magnitude of 6.0, followed by another one in November, which will be followed by others. Further quakes will also occur in Taiwan and other areas of the world, with Switzerland and other parts of Europe also being severely affected in later times. The damage caused by the quakes will be extensive, and human lives will also be lost. Major storms, earthquakes, and floods will also cause a large number of landslides. Your last question is easy to explain. Violent storms in sea areas are often only precursors of earthquakes, the strength of which is determined by the strength of the storms. This happens especially when violent storms, which form over the oceans, stir them up deep down, creating gigantic waves reaching deep into the water, which have enormous masses of weight, which then roll through the sea. The weight of the enormous water masses then continues as pressure deep into the Earth's interior, whereby tectonic processes of change take place in the tectosphere, leading to tectonic earthquakes.
And everything around the world is going to get much worse. Because of human-made environmental, natural, and planetary destruction, natural disasters are going to get much worse. And the tectosphere is the upper zone of the Earth's crust, which reaches down to a depth of about 100 kilometers, no?
That is correct.
The greatest evil from which everything is created is the huge overpopulation, which cannot be tolerated by the whole of nature. Because this is the factor that causes the destruction of nature and the whole environment and the planet itself and more life forms to disappear from nature, because they are being exterminated by poisons and profit hunting, etc. The gigantic mass of humanity of currently 7.5 billion 7,500,000, as you affirmed the population recently, is exploiting all the resources of the earth, and it is doing so much worse than was previously claimed. So the resources have already dwindled so much more enormously that soon there will be nothing left. The pollution of the atmosphere and of plants of all kinds through emissions from the burning of fossil and non-renewable energy sources has also become so rampant that the damage done to nature as a whole can no longer be repaired within a reasonable time. In some cases, nature would need many hundreds, and sometimes even thousands of years to repair the damage, and humankind would also have to help with effective measures. The whole evil is solely the fault of the enormous and constantly growing overpopulation, for which more and more land is being destroyed, houses and factories built, fertile land walled up, tarred and covered with concrete. But neither the government officials nor the scientists and the people are talking about this. Because firstly, everything is deliberately hushed up. Secondly, many human beings are indifferent or only interested in profit. And thirdly, an enormous number of people are too low in intelligentum and dim-witted to recognize the effective truth. But this leads to the fact that the whole destruction of the earth and of life by human is irresponsibly continued. This also means that drinking water and food in third world countries is becoming increasingly scarce. New diseases and epidemics are appearing. The earth is rebelling with storms, volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Crime and criminality are continuing to rampage, and wars are being waged. But it also means that the majority of the earthly humanity is becoming more and more of low intelligentum and dim-witted, which in turn leads to more and more incompetent creatures being elected to the governments and put into power, who cheat the people, betray the country, exercise evil power and evil coercion and exploit the people through immense and ever-new taxes, especially that part of the people who have to earn their living harshly and by the sweat of brow. For my part, I unfortunately see it that this whole madness of the earth humans cannot be stopped, and that all shouting against the madness fades away in the desert. It is well heard, but it goes in one ear and out the other. It is exactly the same as when you speak through a tube. There will probably only be an end when there is nothing left to save and the downfall can no longer be stopped. In my opinion, the Third World Fire has been in full swing for a long time now, except that it looks different from a real world war, which insane powers of state may sooner or later be able to trigger if the peoples of all countries do not finally come to their senses and relieve the madmen of their state power and create peace. The years 2006, 2010, 2011, and 2012 are still looming, in the course of which worldwide acts of war could be triggered, but I always have the thought that by some circumstances the whole thing could still be sorted out, and such acts of war could be avoided. So far, it has fortunately worked out well over the past decades. If we disregard the fact that individual war foci around the world brought much suffering, need, and destruction, because power-hungry and crazy state powers let their violence work, such as especially the powers of the USA, Israel, Palestine, and Sudan. Perhaps there will be a more moderate policy, at least in Palestine, when Yasser Arafat dies next November, as Quetzal said in the 1980s. But there are also many smaller herds around the world, where civil wars, etc. are raging, and death, misery, destruction, and ruin are spreading. Nor must we forget the worldwide terrorism, which is just as bad as the wars and civil wars that are being fought, which are ultimately nothing more than sheer terror. When I think of the U.S. President George W. Bush, who is a terrorcrat, new term by Billy, it makes me sick to my stomach. If, as Quetzal said more than 15 years ago, he really does come to power again in November, and thus, for the second time, then the earthly population will indeed still be faced with a great deal of evil and great evils, although there could possibly still be worldwide armed conflicts in 2006. But in addition to that, it is to be hoped that everything will be sorted out after all, and that the U.S.-American terrocracy, new term by Billy, also could be spelled terrorcracy, will suffer such a tremendous defeat that everything will be moderated a little bit. But as long as this is not the case, the whole terror will continue around the world and still lead earthly humankind into very bad events.
Your words in the earth human's ear, for they set forth the horror of what is actually given and will continue to be given by the overpopulation and by the USA. For the time being, there is unfortunately not much chance of a quick change for the better, because the majority of the Republican population of the USA is being beguiled by machinations, sectarianism, and by the lies and empty promises like those made by Bush. These humans are not able to make their own logical thoughts about everything, so they cannot make their own logical decisions. But this also includes all the powers that be and the supporters of all countries in the world who cheer George W. Bush. They are all like a herd of misguided sheep following their leader, who lets them fall into a deadly abyss. The same is the case with the powerful in Israel, whom the serfs follow, reaching out their hands for murder and destruction. But the same is true of Palestine, where all those who have gone astray have so far followed the murderous machinations of Yasser Arafat without hesitation or conscience, whose life will indeed come to an end in November. It will only be small steps in this direction, but it is to be hoped that they will lead everything to the better, and that they will be able to prevent the greatest evils from happening after all. And to your word formation, terrorcrat and terrocracy in relation to the American President George Walker Bush, and the USA, I would like to say that you have created two terms with it, which could not be more fitting. And that the man will come to power again, and that the candidate John F. Kerry will lose, who will conduct the election absolutely honestly. That is certain. There will again be electoral fraud, and it will be in such a comprehensive form as has never been seen on the earth before. Already in the first fraudulent election 4 years ago, It was ensured that in various pro-Bush states in America, some 400,000 fake votes were preserved in the computers, which will be used in favor of Bush in the new election, which will be a farce, under the eyes of the international election observers who will be fooled. In particular, the states of Florida and Ohio will be involved in this election fraud.
It is to be hoped that things will turn out for the better after all. But as far as the USA or its population is concerned, I do not want to call the majority of them terrocratic, of low intelligentum, dumb and dim-witted, but only all those who are sick in their brains in this direction, and they are usually Republicans. But now to the real question. I would like you to explain a few things about monogamy and polygamy, and how you handle everything. On Earth, the woman has been proclaimed a monogamous being, especially by the Christian religion. And in addition to that, the so-called monogamy has arisen from it. But my question also refers to the conditions concerning lesbian women and homosexual men, who can officially enter into partnership and who are recognized without restrictions by law.
That also has its correctness. Certain nations, however, have established rules by which women are artificially made monogamous, in such a wise that man or the man's world has declared women to be man's property and subject to him, whereby a monogamous bond with a single man is the result of the whole. The man, on the other hand, was said to be polygamous, and he could have several women, whereby the important factor became the most important point, that a woman can only be copulated with and impregnated by a single man, while the man is able to copulate and impregnate several women in a short time. This is equally true in the fauna world, because a female, like the human female, can have her own eggs fertilized by only one male, while a male, like the human male, can fertilize the eggs of many females. However, the factor that the more frequently life forms copulate, the greater the mass of male sperm is, because their large number prevents sperm from causing subsequent ejaculation by further copulation of other males, which could lead to egg fertilization or subsequent fertilization or second fertilization. If, naturally, fewer copulations take place under one life-form genus, then there is correspondingly less sperm quantity in the male part, because a larger quantity is not necessary, because there is little or no danger with regard to foreign sperm. It is the same with humans. In principle, however, it can be said that both sexes are not monogamous, but are polygamous by nature, but that, since the human is capable of highly developed and conscious thinking, they can, through their thoughts and feelings, as well as through their motivation and will, etc., place themselves in a self-determined monogamy. A fact that the human makes use of, especially when they are connected in honest and true love with a partner, whereby the polygamous need can be weakened and even completely neutralized. So, in this regard, the conscious thoughts, feelings, motivation, and will, etc., are the decisive factors for monogamy. In this wise, the woman understands her monogamy in this respect to refer to a single life partner, just as it applies in monogamous form to the man. This monogamous form also exists among our peoples in the self-determination of the individual persons. Although elsewhere, however, among our and certain other peoples, polygamy also exists, based on several female partners for one man. So, for example, with us, every man has the possibility of marrying up to 4 women, with each such union forming a whole unit. Of course, women also have the same rights, but these are very rare and hardly worth mentioning exceptions, and it is in no wise a rule if it is used. It is more common for same-sex couples to form an alliance in which, as in the case of heterosexuals, there can be both monogamy and polygamy, but the same is also true for same-sex couples and for those of the same sex.
Then it can be said in relation to the human being that in them, both in the woman and in the man. Monogamy is given only by a corresponding motivation, a corresponding will, as a result of a real, true love connection, by a corresponding attitude, and by the corresponding thoughts and feelings.
This corresponds to what reality shows.
This is not something many Earth humans will be happy about when confronted with this fact.
This will indeed be the case. Because the human being of the earth is dominated by too many false moral concepts and the like, whereby mainly very many erroneous and completely wrong religious and philosophical, as well as hypocritical, two-faced, falsified, and untenable teachings contribute to this.
Well said, dear friend. This fact is unfortunately to blame for much evil and disaster on the earth and among all humankind. However, it is difficult for many to understand this, because they are so caught up in the heresies that they cannot free themselves from them.
To the whole thing now really only belongs the explanation why, within the framework of the above, monogamy for women and polygamy for men is given by creational laws, as you have described everything very precisely in your book, Law of Love. Assuming that our conversation in this regard is also written down and published as a contact report, such a statement is probably very important. That you explain the facts of the case is surely only understandable and also desired.
That may be. Then I will explain what is necessary. When it is said that the monogamy of the woman and the polygamy of the man in an alliance corresponds to a creational law or creational laws, as I have described in the book Law of Love, then this is correct. But the whole thing is to be understood in the form. Through the creational laws, the human has a free will which he or she can form and bring into effect as required, thus also in relation to monogamy and polygamy. According to this law, my book, The Law of Love, is also interpreted, whereby I have interpreted the facts of monogamy and polygamy in the wise as they were created in the earliest times by the peoples of Nocedemion, in accordance with the creational laws which attribute free will to humans. When this will is put into practice and thus realized, it corresponds to the creational laws, both in the positive and negative. Therefore, it must be declared that the entire content of the law of love corresponds to the given creational law of love, because humans can form it in their own wise according to his or her free will given according to the law of the creation and put it into practice. The fact is, and this must be explained, that only all that is directed against the creational laws is that which is thought, felt and worked by humans in an tend to get very badly out of control of the good human nature manner, and thus brings damage against the evolution. Positive and negative are always aligned according to the laws of the creation, as long as they do not go against the creational Visin, inner core nature, and therefore also not against evolution. Monogamy and polygamy are created according to the laws of the creation, and therefore have their validity, because in every form they are evolutionary, because both forms are predetermined according to the laws of the creation, and consequently can be chosen, formed and used by humans according to their own needs and according to their own will. And how the human, according to his or her free will, handles the whole, is left to him or her alone, so that they can form everything to such an extent as is shown by the law of love. The only condition is that no Ausartungen come about against the laws of the creation, and that evolution is not impaired. For this purpose, the teaching of the Spirit and the 12 recommendations must be observed, which explain as far as possible what the laws of the creation contain and what is directed against them. Rules, laws, guidelines, recommendations and ordinances of human design with regard to monogamy and polygamy are created by humans according to their free will, so that they are in conformity with the laws of the creation, and thus correspond to the creational if they do not fall into Ausertung, and are therefore not directed against the evolution. This is actually what has to be explained, because in this regard nothing has yet been comprehensively revealed in and of itself.
As a general explanation, it should also be enough, and specific explanations would lead too far. What you have explained should also be understandable enough.
Still, it will raise a lot of questions.
That will certainly be the case.
A question about the so-called Utsi, or Urk, which means the steadfast one. This name seems a bit strange to me, as if it was not of earthly origin. Was that really his real name, or was it given to him by your ancestors?
The name Urk is actually derived from the Ptaah name. Urk's real name was Onda, but the meaning of this name is unknown to me. And before you ask, which will be inevitable, let me also say that the female name is Urka.
I was actually going to ask you about that. Then just now another question, which I would like to have answered officially from you. Although Svath, your father, already explained to me what it is about the earth lines, currents, and water veins, that this is all nonsense. But I would like to have an official explanation in a contact conversation. In this context is also the pendulum, that is to say the radiesthesia, which is operated by the so-called radiesthesist with the sidereal pendulum and the dowsing rod. These people are supposed to be medially gifted and, by striking the pendulum or the divining rod, find underground deposits of water veins, earth lines, currents, and ore deposits, as well as other hidden information of all kinds, in addition to the alleged perception of fluid swinging waves of humans, animals, plants, and objects. The radiesthesists also claim that they could find missing people, animals, and objects, etc. through radiesthesia. But this, so Svath taught me, is absolute nonsense, which he could prove to me by the machinations of a larger number of radiesthesists, whom I was allowed to observe and accompany in their work with radiesthesia. In addition, Svath proved to me with very highly developed measuring instruments and apparatus that the so-called earth lines currents do not exist, and that they are therefore only an illusion. Also, with regard to underground water veins, he taught me that there are no such veins, and that they neither radiate to the Earth's surface, nor can they negatively influence humans, animals, and plants. Underground water veins of this form do not exist, but only underground rivers and large quantities of water, which, however, occupy large areas of the Earth's interior, whereby the water is stored in certain absorbent rocks and other layers of the Earth. And such water-storing rock and earth layers are so frequent that practically everywhere water can be found in the Earth's interior, whereby the question arises in each case only how deep must be drilled in order to come across such water-bearing layers, which can then perhaps be used for wells. The only thing that really exists is the Earth's magnetism, which can manifest itself particularly strongly in certain places, but which in no wise has a harmful influence on humans, animals, and plants, but can only produce some particularly strong magnetic effects. This is in contrast to electromagnetic oscillations, which are generated by electro-technological plants, apparatuses, devices, lines, transformers, as well as transmitting antennas, etc., and are harmful to health with regard to the physical organism of humans, animals, and plants, but also to the psyche and even to the consciousness of humans. But all this has nothing to do with the so-called places of power, as they are thought up by humans who believe that great mental powers or other swinging waves occur and work in a parapsychological or esoteric framework, which is of course pure nonsense. All this is based solely on a profound imagination and on delusions that are the preserve of all those who believe this nonsense. I know from my own experience that the humans who cling to the nonsense of this belief are as completely unteachable as those who have a strong religious, sectarian, political, scientific, or philosophical belief. For them, truth and reality are something foreign or imaginary, which is why they banish themselves to the realm of illusion and negate everything that has to do with truth and reality. In fact, I know what I am talking about, because I have had enough experience around the world, also with regard to the deceptions of alleged ghostly apparitions, ghost photos, spirit operations, spirit healing, alleged telekinesis, telepathy and levitation, clairvoyance, etc. also with regard to UFOs, which are supposed to be of extraterrestrial origin, but which are in fact of earthly origin. I have learned a great deal through your help, and have gained knowledge which proves that on the earth, everything in this respect is usually based on faith and delusion, as well as on the machinations of lies, fraud, charlatanry, sleight of hand, swindling and illusion, but also on imagination, deception and self-generated visions, etc. Also regarding many UFOs, you have proved to me that they are not of extraterrestrial, but purely of earthly origin. Power states of the earth, like especially the USA, England, Canada, and Russia, have been consciously organizing deceptive maneuvers since the 30s by carrying out secret test flights with new and futuristic flying craft and other flying objects. They continue to do so without informing the public, which leads to the belief that the planes and other flying devices are to do with extraterrestrial spaceships. So the governmental secrecy consciously continues to fuel the belief of the population that the UFOs are spacecraft of alien visitors or intruders, which is of course absolute nonsense, because extraterrestrial flying machines can only be observed very rarely on Earth. Thus, humankind is led by the nose by the state powers and secret services, as well as by the secret research powers with regard to the UFOs. Extraterrestrial visitors, if I disregard you, are so rare that they are to be looked for like a needle in a haystack. That was different when you still had fixed stations on our world, but that is long gone now, and therefore Earth-foreign flying devices can only be observed very rarely. But the fact that Earth humans continue to claim that they have any contact with extraterrestrials or spirit forms, etc., whether physical, telepathic, or channeling, that is simply senseless swindling. Delusion, schizophrenia, charlatanry, or even lies and deceit, because for several decades there has been no such contact whatsoever, if I disregard our permanent contact. At least this is how I have been oriented by you. But exactly this fact is denied by all kinds of believers or know-it-alls and by so-called experts, because everything that is lies, nonsense, deceit, fraud and charlatanry is accepted by scientists, believers, know-it-alls and so-called experts as real and effective reality, believed and declared in this form as truth, not only with regard to UFOs, but also with regard to telepathy, telekinesis, levitation, and teleportation. But in contrast to this, all that is real and effective reality and truth and reasonable, normal and conclusive for logical thinkers, is slandered and denied as lies, fraud, charlatanry, and swindle, and those few who really master telepathy, telekinesis, levitation and teleportation, etc., and can be counted on one hand, are humiliated, ridiculed, and stomped into the ground by doubters, ignorant critics, know-it-alls of all kinds, as well as by slander and lies. But now the real question. What can you explain about all this?
Eduard, dear friend, you approach me with a question and with things and answer them yourself in detail. Our findings and our knowledge in the form you mentioned, as my father gave it to you, are, as in my father's time, also the current state of our scientific research and the resulting findings and our level of knowledge. This is to be thus understood in with regard to pendulum and stick dowsing, as well as to alleged contacts to Earth-foreign beings of any kind, with regard to telepathy, levitation, and telekinesis, as well as UFOs, that is to say, the unknown flying objects. What you have said corresponds to reality. And in addition to that, we and our allies of our Federation have been the only Earth foreigners for a long time who come to this planet and maintain contact with a person of this world, and that is you alone. But that has its own special reason, as you yourself know very well. But it is precisely this fact that has led to you and us being slandered and attacked and insulted by lies since the beginning of our contacts. The pathologically inclined troublemakers, slanderers, and other malicious ones in this respect are, however, so unexperienced in an intelligence-based manner that they cannot think far enough to recognize the real reality and truth. They are not able to recognize that the alleged messages of alleged extraterrestrials given by alleged contact persons are so stupid and banal that they originate from nothing but a completely illogical and usually religious sectarian fantasy. In fact, we know nothing of these alleged contact persons and their messages from alleged extraterrestrials, etc., that corresponds to truth and logic. It must also be said that if contacts had ever actually existed, whereby important messages or a teaching had been transmitted, these would then have continued until the end of the lives of the contact persons concerned and not simply been broken off. Such an action would be completely illogical, because if some beings set out from the vastness of the universe to a planet to bring messages and a teaching, then this is not just a trivial religious sectarian nonsense or the like, which is then also ended after a short time. If it really is true that contacts between Earth humans and Earth foreigners come about with regard to messages and a teaching, then such contacts are not simply broken off again unless there are compelling reasons for breaking them off. Other individual contacts, which are unexpectedly brought about simply by chance, are based only on brief encounters, which, however, are of no significance and are not connected with any mission. Real contacts between Earth humans and Earth foreigners, as is the case with us, lead to a lifelong connection and to a lifelong and immense work. And that in our case, you alone are our only contact person on the Earth has its own special reason, as you yourself know very well. You are in fact in every respect the only person on the Earth whom we can meet physically and with whom we can maintain telepathic contact without any mental damage. This also means that it is impossible for us to make contact with other Earth humans, so we cannot make any other connections, except through you as a mediator. And should it be that in the coming time, other alien beings find their way to Earth in such a wise that they establish open contact with earthly humanity, then we will withdraw definitively into our space-time structure, because our directives are aligned in this form. But I have already explained this to you on previous visits and conversations.
Yes, I know. Also good. But you are talking again about foreign extraterrestrials coming to the Earth. Is that going to occur in the foreseeable future? For my part, I thought that due to the extremely negative circumstances of the earthly humanity, this would no longer be the case for the time being.
Your train of thought is also correct, because we do not know anything for the foreseeable future about Earth foreign beings coming to the Earth to establish open contact with earthly humankind.
But your looks into the future.
They only exist in this relationship until the end of the year 2004, because for us the appearance of Earth foreigners is only then of importance, when they actually visit the Earth in order to get into open contact with earthly humanity. But that will not be the case so very quickly. Those who were originally supposed to come here will in any case no longer appear, because through secret visits and clarifications on the Earth, they became aware of all the evil and negativity that is especially driven by those responsible for the state and their followers, as well as by the earthly population. They were thus deterred, and the decision was made that contacts with earthly humanity should not be made, so that the evil and negativity of earthly humanity could not spread to their humanity. Therefore, when extraterrestrial intelligences openly contact earthly humanity, they will be other beings whose mentality, technology, and science, etc., we know just as little about as also their level of evolution with regard to compliance with the creational laws. nor do we know anything about their social laws and regulations, etc.
Then there may come some unpleasant surprise.
This possibility is given, but it should not be expected.
Of course not. It would also be idiotic and would correspond to the kind of nonsense that has been practiced in the worst form ever since the entertainment film industry came into existence. Because all films that are aimed at extraterrestrials assume and are designed in such a manner that extraterrestrials are only evil and degenerate. In particular, how could it be otherwise? The USA is the tone setter in this regard, with the government and secret services stoking up the whole nonsense in a mean, kind, and wise in order to set the people into panic. In addition to this, there is also the crazy law in the USA that Earth humans can be punished in the USA if they have any provable contacts with extraterrestrials. Especially it is punishable if regulations concerning quarantine are violated, if contact with extraterrestrial humans, animals, or materials, etc. has taken place.
I know that. Everything in this regard is extensively recorded in the documents, which are recorded as follows: Title 14, Aeronautics and Space, Chapter 5, National Aeronautica and Space Administrations, Part 1204, Administrative and Policy, Subpart 5, Delegations and Designations. Extraterrestrial exposure, under new paragraph 1204.509 is added, reading as follows: Paragraph 1204.509, Power and Authority, to exercise authority with respect to extraterrestrial exposure. This section comprises 3 points, A, B, and C, under the sign T. O. Payne, Administrator F. R. Dock. 69-2-8474, filed July 15, 1969, 1056A. Federal Register, Fuller. 34, number 135, Wednesday, July 16, 1969. This is followed by the actual explanations in Par 1211.100 to Par 1211.108, which are divided into nearly 40 points.
Respect, my friend. If I had to dig that out of my memory, I could not have done it. But another question I am always being asked. Even in your country, deceased bodies are burned at will. I am always asked why you do this, because the burning of the body destroys the fluidal swinging waves. Although I know that this is not the case, because the skeleton is preserved when the body is burned, it would be interesting to know why this is so.
Burning is a process of cold fire that does not produce heat. You can imagine it as if something is burned and dissolved with dry ice. So the cold fire only dissolves the actual body without affecting the skeleton. Through the process of the cold fire burning, the mental fluid swinging waves of the human being settles into the skeleton and is thus preserved, whereby the following personalities can use the powers again when they are born through the rebirth of the spirit form and the overall consciousness block.
Short, concise, and clear. Unfortunately, not yet possible with us. Well then, I suppose after this cold burning process, the skeleton is buried.
That is correct. In this regard, we have burials in graves and catacombs, as well as burials in small ossuaries far away from residential areas.
Speaking of burials, what actually happens to Arafat's body in November? As far as I know, he wants to be buried in Jerusalem.
This will be prevented by Ariel Sharon by coining the words that only kings would be buried in Jerusalem and not 1,000 murderous terrorists.
Aha, and that he too is a 1,000-fold murderer. Of course there will be no question of that. And it will certainly also be the case that Arafat will then be irresponsibly cheered into heaven by the whole world of the ones of low intelligentum, the servile and the dim-witted ones, and especially by the powers that be, as it always is when state terrorists, such as murderous presidents and such rabble, bless the world. It has been like this since time immemorial, and it will probably remain so for a long time to come.
That will unfortunately indeed be the case, just as it will be the case that Arafat's death will further fuel the hatred of the Palestinians by radical, terrorist, fanatical, and extreme elements. The Israeli state terrorist Ariel Sharon will also do a lot to ensure that the senseless hatred of the Palestinians does not come to a standstill, because he wants to continue to use all his murderous power. George W. Bush will act equally irresponsibly.
This has already been mentioned, and when I compare U.S. President G.W. Bush with Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin and Ariel Sharon, Yasser Arafat, Saddam Hussein, Nicolae Ceausescu, Slobodan Milosevic, and all sorts of other similar murderous creatures, I am certainly not wrong. What is your opinion?
The comparison is really true if you consider that President Bush is solely concerned with his murderous power. To take the helm over all countries worldwide and thus make the U.S. plans for world domination a reality. His words, "fight against terrorism," are truly only a means to an end, to rule over the whole world. In truth, Bush is indifferent to all global terrorism in the sense that he really wants to fight it, because in truth he only uses it to be able to play his power worldwide and to attack more and more countries in order to establish himself in them with military forces. A factor that is recognized by many humans, which is why they also develop an unrestrained hatred against U.S. America, which will spread more and worldwide in the circles of the peoples, even if the respective governments and the people of low intelligentum declare their solidarity with U.S. America. The truth is that the majority of the earthly humanity is afraid of U.S. America and its domestic and foreign policy, and has been for decades, because other U.S. presidents have maneuvered about in a similar fashion to that of President George Walker Bush. Yet the current U.S. president is the worst who ever ruled over the United States of America. Moreover, in an autocratic wise which, however, all those of low intelligentum who flock around him are not able to notice. This is true both of those who agree with him in the immediate vicinity of his government, and also of the Senate, and of those strata of the population who blindly trust this totally irresponsible man, and take his religious machinations, such as sayings and prayers, etc., at face value and thereby believe that he means it honestly. Especially since this totally irresponsible and megalomaniacal one is in power and is stirring up the world with his war, many humans have realized that Bush and his policies are not only a danger for the humans of those countries and their resources, but also a general malicious threat to the whole world and the whole of earthly humanity. He upsets the balance of the entire economy as well as the balance of the whole world in general. For a long time now, U.S. America has been creating a military system that is dangerous, evil, and deadly for the whole world, and sooner or later it will be able to bring the whole world under U.S. American supremacy, unless the human beings of the earth finally come to their senses and thwart this. There is still time for this, but this time is running out more and more, because all those elements of U.S. America will not rest, to achieve the secret goal of absolute world domination, who, in every respect, with their acts of war everywhere, as well as with their Secret Service machinations and the alleged fight against terror, are only anxious to protect their own interests. Those Americans who have long since recognized this truth distance themselves from these secret plans and from all the warlike machinations because they want peace and not war. Their sense is directed towards considering defensive and therefore defense-based warlike actions only when their country is effectively and directly attacked. However, they do not want war in foreign countries, which are wrongly accused by the government of attacks against the USA, only to invade the foreign country by war, to bring it under U.S. power and thus to occupy it, to annex it if possible, and to exploit its resources, etc. In this respect, I am talking about half of the Americans who are, however, shouted down and, if possible, bludgeoned by those who want war and world domination. Whoever is not in favor of the criminal and felonious actions of the respective U.S. American government and their respective rogue presidents is simply helplessly exposed to the monstrous machinations of the same and is discriminated against or even harassed in life and limb, despite the fact that there is a freedom of opinion and speech in the USA. But those who say too much automatically incur damage even then, when the truth is told too much, and thus the people stumble across the effective truth and then are no longer of the same opinion as the government.
These are clear words. And if you are talking about freedom of opinion and speech, then I would like to say that in Switzerland, too, the truth about criminals, scoundrels, sectarians, felons, and the government cannot be told openly, because otherwise legal punishment will take place immediately, and it will not be the one who revealed the truth who will be in the right, but the one who is guilty. I have experienced this firsthand. For this reason, hardly anyone in Switzerland ever dares to speak the truth in public and to defend freedom of opinion and speech. It is also a fact that certain inexperienced journalists and newspaper editors in Switzerland are so much of low intelligentum and dim-witted that they have no idea what freedom of opinion and freedom of speech really mean. Consequently, it happens, as I too have been accused of doing by inexperienced people who also think they are big, that if you tell the truth openly and freely, and then you are insulted, then you are also interfering in politics. It is completely idiotic, because judging and telling the truth about political matters and irresponsible state power has nothing to do with politicizing, but only with openly telling the truth and opinion and perceiving freedom of speech. The right of free opinion and freedom of speech is enshrined in law in Switzerland, as it is in international human rights. But especially in Switzerland, the whole thing is only valid on paper, but often not in reality. This is particularly the case when the truth about sectarians, criminals and liars and swindlers is openly revealed, because then these or their dim-witted followers of morbidly low intelligentum can sue those who bring the truth to light. The accusers are then, as a rule, also the winners, while those who reveal the truth and make it public are the losers. This is the Swiss law on freedom of expression and speech, which means that the truth must not be publicly revealed, and that liars, cheats, criminals, and sectarians must not be openly named in these denominations. To this injustice, the law also extends its hand and thus encourages crime, fraud, sectarianism, and lying. And that believers and all kinds of other people are exploited, driven to suicide, made psychically ill, and made stupid in the process is simply allowed by the law and the judiciary. But what am I talking about? Because these things that are objectionable could only be changed for the better by the people if they would finally come to their senses, if they would abolish false laws and replace them with better laws. So I will not talk about this anymore and ask you this. We have often talked about Nazca and the structures on the so-called Nazca Plain, which were made by the former inhabitants. But now I was asked why the Nazca culture had perished. I answered the question by saying that over the years, torrential rainfall had caused enormous mudslides that buried everything underneath and finally wiped out the Nazca culture. So Svath once taught me in the 40s. He also said then that the Nazcans had migrated to the sea to fish and collect seafood. They dried the fish, etc., to bring them back to their hometowns as welcome food. Do you know anything more about this relationship?
There would be a lot to tell, but we can talk about that another time, because it has become time for me to fulfill my obligations that I still have to fulfill on Era. But what my father reported to you corresponds to what actually happened in early times with regard to the Nazca culture. So, if you do not have any more very important questions.
I do not right now. Then give my warmest regards to everyone, at least to all those dearest to me who I know personally. Goodbye, dear friend Ptaah. It was a great pleasure for me to be able to talk to you once again in the wise that was the case today.
The pleasure is also mine. See you again next week. Farewell, dear friend. Goodbye, Edward.